We will start out with roll call, please.
Dr. Bertram?
Present.
Dr. Ennis?
Present.
Dr. Fraser?
Yes.
Dr. McMahon?
Present.
Ms. Miller?
Here.
Mr. Wall?
Here.
Mr. Watts?
Here.
Here.
Dr. Yeager?
Here.
Superintendent?
Here. Would you please stand for the pledge? I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Well, good morning. We will start with the approval of the agenda. Do we have a motion to accept?
So moved.
Second. Madam Superintendent?
Yes.
I have a motion to make a revision to the agenda,
Okay.
and I'm just getting a quick look at it. So, and I'll explain the reason why I'm making this motion at discussion, but I would like to make a motion to move item H to the discussion agenda with no action today.
Second.
So you're asking, excuse me, for item H, which is proposed accountability rule, correct?
Yes.
To be moved off of new business onto discussion.
Yes.
So we have a motion to move that, and we have a second. Any other questions or comments about that?
And if I can just explain the reason why I'm making this motion, I feel like this is an issue that has caused a great deal of concern out in the real world. And I feel that some of the language didn't receive the proper discussion before being crafted, and I would like there to be a little bit more transparency in this process. And I feel that we would be best served if the board were to have that discussion and then come back for action at a later meeting.
Any other comments? Kate?
I just have a question. Could we hear from board staff what, if any, impact there would be in making that decision to delay action to a date beyond January? I don't understand that as well as I would like to in order to thoughtfully consider Gordon's motion.
I wanted both of us to come up here in case there's any more specific questions about the rule, so I brought Chad with us. But as far as the impact and timing, pushing back the board's approval...
Tim, you're hard to hear. Could you speak into that?
I'm sorry. If the board were to decide to push back the vote on the proposed draft language to February, the potential impact would be to the overall rulemaking process, which is somewhat lengthy. The notice of intent, the ability to start accepting public comment might be impacted, as well as when we could hold a public hearing or public hearings to allow the public to start to participate in this process and start giving us feedback. So my answer would be that this does impact the rulemaking process, and it does push back the time when this rule could be effective, which could have a negative impact. Yes.
Isn't this to just simply start the rulemaking process and to provide opportunity for public comment?
You said it perfectly. Yes.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
I just want to clarify a little bit what Vince just said, because we actually initiated this rulemaking process last July, and that's when the clock started running on the one-year period in which we're supposed to get the process completed. So by delaying it, I don't think there's a huge impact, but it does shorten the length of time within the prescribed year period of which we can have public participation, feedback, and it also does preclude us from going forward and putting it out for public comment today as was intended.
So what's the implementation plan for, if in fact we were to vote on this and get public feedback? Give us those timelines and give us implementation time, assuming the feedback was that we're going to employ these changes, for lack of a better term, the words in green, employ those, and what date would that be?
I think I'm going to defer to Chad here. I believe he's put together a timeline for this particular set of rules.
And I can touch on this more in the presentation that's queued up that was going to be for later, but essentially the notice of public intent to adopt a rule should have been published this morning or will be published this afternoon with the Indiana Register. We need to have the board approve language within 28 days so we can file that language on time, as well as the notice for public hearings. If we were to delay it beyond that period, then it's unlikely a rule will be passed in time to apply it to the 18-19 school year. And one of the assumptions used when drafting this was that the board had expressed an interest in having a rule, a new rule in place for the 18-19 school year. So that's kind of where we're at and why today is a good day to approve language.
So is it a possibility for us to look at what is written? As you heard Mr. Hendry say, there's the green language that's of concern. Is it possible for us to have further discussion and to determine that we could move forward, however, without the green language? Is there a way to do that?
Absolutely. The language provided is simply a draft staff recommendation of a proposed rule for this board to consider. You all as the board are free to accept or reject or modify that in any way you'd like before it's published and put out for public comment. The green language, is simply ideas expressed by members of the board that they wish to see reflected in the new proposed rule.
And Chad, that's one of the reasons why I'm have a little bit of heartburn on the language, is that I feel like the cart became a little bit ahead of the horse, and that when we are considering language that would have, I think, a substantial impact, that there be a full discussion at the board level and then guidance given to staff to draft the language. And I just feel like, I have concerns about us voting on that language, certainly today, when a little of us, obviously saw the language for the first time over the holidays. And I think there's, I would not be incorrect to say there has been a great deal of concern about some of the issues that, and unintended consequences that may be raised by us taking action on that today. So that's kind of the reasoning behind, obviously I understand there's a timeline, but I don't think there's any harm done in seeking, and we will be seeking over the course of the next month, substantial public public comment, formal or informal, but it'll give us the opportunity to have a little bit more transparency out there to have some of those discussions before potentially considering, language that might be drafted.
Yeah, and absolutely, and that's certainly within in the board's purview to decide. The final kind of thought here then is that if a rule is not in place before the start of next school year, the letter grades that are issued for the 18-19 school year will be based on the board's current rule.
I understand.
I want to make that clear.
Legally, is there an issue with that in terms of ESSA or?
There's not. Like I said, I was under the impression that the board's preference was to have a
That
rule
may be.
aligned. Yeah.
I just wanted to make sure legally there was not a problem with that in terms of ESSA or an issue, not preference, but.
No, there's, no issue with that. The board will follow the board's rule and state law. Yeah.
So since we have had such discussion, let's take a vote to see if the board is comfortable with such a move. So Gordon, can you repeat that, please?
Sure. My motion is simply to amend the draft agenda to move item number H to the discussion agenda with no action being taken today.
Before we take a vote, I apologize, but I just wondered if Chad could advance to the slide on his presentation that lays out the sort of the facts of record on the timeline, because before we vote, I just think it's important that we have clarity around the actual dates when we first received the rule, the amount of time that passed, that the board had possession of the rule, the period of time for feedback that brings us here today, just to make sure that there is not a misunderstanding about the timeline under which we've been operating in the period of time that input has been able to be solicited informally by members of the board or others as we prepare to move into a formal period of time to solicit feedback. And again, I just think making sure that all the facts are clearly articulated is important so that we can make well-informed decisions.
So the timeline is on the screen. We have a motion on the table. Do we have a second? Any second to move it? Second. Discussion?
Could I ask a question first? I apologize. Chad, can you explain to me how this will look differently with making amendments if we start rulemaking today? Because I have concerns with some of the stuff that's in there. But what is the difference between starting rulemaking today and then coming back and making those changes, or as opposed to laying this off for a month? What does that do? And again, I want, this is initiating it, and there's still room and time to change this. And the thing is, I can see Gordon's point, because I myself would make changes, but I don't want to slow us down because I know those changes can still be made.
Yeah, absolutely. And please let me be clear that rulemaking has started. This morning, when the notice of public intent to adopt a rule was published with the Indiana Register, rulemaking started. Within that process, and that was done pursuant to a recommendation adopted by the board in July of 2017, where the board directed staff to begin the rulemaking process for purposes of amending the accountability rule. So we've been operating since that time, have now finally got the notice of public intent published. Now that we've started, board staff does not publish a proposed rule until the language has been approved by the board. That's what we're asking. So at this point, we are asking for the board to simply approve language that staff may publish so we can start receiving public comments specific to that language. Public hearings will be held, public comments will be accepted, not only in the public hearings, but by email and phone as well. Public comments will be summarized, provided to the board. We certainly encourage the board to discuss those comments in depth and determine which changes you'd like to make to the rule and which comments need to be reflected in the rule before a final rule is adopted. But that final rule is not expected to be brought in front of the board until the summertime at this point. So there will be ample time to amend the language based on public comment.
Once we get through the period of public comment, what is the time that we have to make adjustments, final rule, given the public comment?
Yeah, you have as much time as you need, understanding that if the board prefers to have a new rule in place for the 18-19 school year, we'll be working against that deadline as a backstop. And I think there's about a 45-day window where the Attorney General has to sign up on the rule as well as the Governor's office. So 45 days before the start of the next school year. Okay, so we'll go through
a period of public input. There will be opportunity for the board to take that into consideration, make final changes or adjustments to that.
Absolutely.
And then we will publish a final rule, correct?
Correct.
And then once that is published, what happens after that?
Once that rule is published, the current rule will no longer be used to place schools in an accountability category. 30 days after it's published, that rule becomes effective and replaces the current accountability.
So there's no opportunity for changes once let me rephrase it. There's no chance for additional public comment after the final rules have been established. Is that correct?
Yes, after they've been officially published in the register. I want to make sure I'm being clear that I'm using final rule in the rulemaking context, not in a final draft of a rule for approval.
I'm thinking more of the final draft. All right, so take us through that process. So we're going to get a lot of feedback. We make changes to this, and then we publish, or we have a final draft.
Yeah, correct.
But at that point, no one has additional comment. There's no opportunity for additional public comment to the final draft. It would just come to the board
If the
for
board
approval.
so chose and there was time available, I mean, that is a possibility, yeah. You're not precluded from doing that, say it that way.
Dr. Freitas?
Maybe I can offer a little more insight to that question. So the way this works with the board is, because we're sort of a unique entity in that we bring it to the board, rules to the board for review and approval. Once public comments, once we've received public comments, once we've had public hearings, we incorporate that, we present all of those to the board. We then present a final draft for board approval. Even at that point, the board could say, we want additional changes to this document before we adopt it. Now, once the document is adopted, it goes to the Attorney General, we prepare a bunch of materials, it goes to the Attorney General's office, and it's published. So that rule can still be changed until the board actually takes a vote on a final draft of that rule.
My concern is the opportunity for public comment once people see a final draft.
Well, and if you like, what we could...
No one's going to know what those changes are until it comes to the board for a final approval, correct?
Correct.
How much time will people have to review that final draft and come before the board and make suggestions or share concerns?
So one option that would be available to the board in this situation would be, once we think we've basically accumulated all the public comment and we've had the public hearings, we can present as a discussion item a proposed final draft of the rule to the board for discussion. And at that time, the board can discuss it, and if you think there's still more things that we need in there, or if there's more public comment during that meeting, we can incorporate that and then actually have the vote on that final draft at the subsequent meeting. So the board can do what it wants here. The board has a lot of control, and it's really just when you're comfortable, that's when the vote happens.
Dr. Freitas?
Sorry I was a few minutes late, but my personal experience in this timeline was, I remember mid-November that I received an email from Chad asking for input, and I believe everyone on the board received that email. Personally, I responded, and we had multiple conversations, Chad and I, and Chad made those changes. And so what you see today, at least my input's in there. I don't know if other people had input. Chad, did other board members provide input that was incorporated?
Yeah, so that was the idea behind incorporating some language and highlighting it in green. It was so that board members who had requested to see certain things in there could see them in the context of a rule, as opposed to talking about them in some abstract fashion. Again, I think, as far as transparency is concerned, the language is highlighted in green. The lines are numbered. It should be very easy for people to reference lines and page numbers for provisions they like or do not like. But there's certainly quite a bit of feedback reflected in that draft.
I think part of the issue is input into the green. Because we saw the green, the lack of input into the green. And I know the green, for all of you who have no idea what we're talking about, are the new edits in addition to ESSA. So we have our ESSA accountability. The green is just language that has been amended so that there is change to our accountability. I apologize, we're talking green language and it could be foreign. So I'm sorry, Dr. Freitas, I cut you off.
I think it's really important to get input from the public as soon as possible. And it's my understanding that if we support this motion, then we are delaying that public input. Is that correct? It would be delayed. If we do not support the motion, then the information will be released shortly and the public will provide input to us and we can move on in the process. So if we support this, I'm concerned we're going to delay this further. I know a lot of people out there do want to respond to it. And I would like to move the process along, give people the opportunity to respond. And what you just clarified about the end of the process, that the public will still be able to provide input along the way, I think that's a great compromise to keep us moving immediately, but yet have that last opportunity after multiple times for public input to have another set of public input. I don't think the board has ever approved anything without public input. And so I think that's a great compromise, and as I understand the motion, I'm not going to support it.
Dr. Ernest?
So do you have, Chad, do you have a response to that?
My only response to that and the questions about the delay is regardless of what language the board feels appropriate to approve for publication, that approval happen before the next 28 days is up, so that way we can maintain the current timeline of publishing a proposed rule as soon as possible.
So would you recommend a special meeting potentially?
If you're going to delay and have this as a discussion item, my recommendation would be to have a meeting before the February meeting to approve language that we can then publish as soon as possible.
Thank you.
And again, that is all in the context of having a rule in place before the start of next
So,
year.
Madam Superintendent, if I can respond to that, and I have deep respect for my colleague, Dr. Freitas, and understand his position. The point I would like to make is that we are undoubtedly going to get public input, and that is the purpose for the motion. We will not have the public input as contemplated by the rulemaking process, in that we would not start officially the formal public comment, but to be sure, we will be receiving substantial public input, which I think is absolutely merited and which we have not really fully received, which is why I think there's a lot of heartburn out there across the state. My concern about the language that has been proposed in green, and again, I respect the input that has been provided by board members, but in my view, as I said, the cart was a little bit before the horse, and there should, in my opinion, have been a full board discussion before pen was put to paper and those regulations those proposed draft language was put together. I certainly didn't see a draft of it, and I may be mistaken, but I certainly did not see a draft of it before it was circulated as part of the agenda on which we were supposed to take action today. And I think that is what has caused a great deal of concern across the state, is that while certainly if we start the rulemaking process to get today with the proposed language approved, there would be ample input or opportunity for the public and others to provide input as the process moves forward formally. What I'm saying is I feel there needs to be a full board discussion, and we need to there could be potential changes to the language that is ultimately approved by this board to commence the rulemaking process. So what I'm saying is I don't think we should start with language which we're seeing, formally as a board for the first time today, and take action on that today. I just feel like, we owe it to the public to have a period of time to provide that informal input before we take action as a board on such an important issue.
Gordon, if I could just comment, I know no one can see me down here, but
Dr. Ernest is next.
No, I'm done.
No,
I no longer want to comment.
I just wanted to clarify, because I didn't want the public to get the impression that we're just seeing this. Because in fact, on November 16th, Chad sent an email out, and I thought I saw everyone's email address on that email, this language, and asked us to give input. I, in fact, have given input regarding the proposed rule, and I feel that we all have had the opportunity to do so since at least November 16th. But in fact, some of the elements of this we were talking about in special work group meetings all the way back to August when we were dealing with ESSA. So this isn't new. And the idea that people haven't had an opportunity to contribute, well, she said it's
Dr. Ernest.
No, I waved to my friend down at the end who wants to talk now.
PJ?
Going back to Chad's request, I guess I look at this differently. Chad's request in November, 100% received it. My intent was to wait until we had public comment to make recommendations, and I guess if that is, and I understand Gordon's point about the cart being before the horse, but that's the way that this process has always worked in my experience. We lay out something, and to be honest, I have changes I will recommend to make to this. I don't care where we start. It's where we finish that's important. So I intentionally did not reply and make comments, because that was my choice to let's wait and see what public comment is. Let's talk to folks that we all trust, and then make recommendations to changes. The starting point, I think that's what's so important and what's confusing here, is this is truly just a starting point. This is not the final rule. This is not where we're going to land. This is just where we're taking off. So that's why I'm comfortable. That's why I didn't respond in November to make recommendations. I wanted to wait to hear public comment to make my recommendations. So I don't care where we take off. It's where we land that's important to me.
Carrie?
I agree that where we finish is important, and I agree that there'll be changes made, but I feel like where we start appears to be, at least to some extent, where some agreement has been made, and without a discussion as a board, and without the public being privy to that discussion, the public isn't as well informed, the public isn't, there isn't the transparency I'd like the public to have with that discussion being at a board meeting so that they hear the input that's being given. I feel like when we met and discussed over the summer, the ESSA tour, trying to talk about what the accountability proposal would be, and then the panel made the recommendation and the board voted on what the accountability would be for ESSA, I felt like that would be, when we received the request for input, my input was all of those ESSA meetings that I attended and all of the accountability panel meetings that I attended, and the vote that we took for the accountability, that was the starting point, and that would be the proposal, and we would work from there, because we had talked about there being one accountability plan for the state and feds. And so, I feel like where we start in written form does have impact.
So we have a motion on the table. Dr. Yeager, last comment.
Thank you. I have several questions. Legal, if you could step to the microphone. Where in writing does it say that we need to move forward with this to make this applicable for the 18-19 school year? I think I heard you say that. Is that correct?
Yeah, so the rulemaking process used by agencies to create new rules is prescribed by statute. There are built-in days. It's a basic tenet of law that we will not retroactively apply regulations to schools or hold them accountable retroactively. And so we've simply used the rulemaking process to build a timeline and worked backwards, knowing that if we're going to have a final rule in place before the start of next school year, this is the latest date.
Okay, I get that, and I appreciate the review of that. Where in writing does it say that we must change this accountability rule and make it implementable by the 18-19 school year? Don't repeat the rulemaking process. I get that, and I think the audience gets that, but where does it say we have to do this for the 18-19 school year?
You as a board do not have to. You can continue to place schools in the A through F categories as you do now. Like I said, the kind of idea expressed by the board in general in July of 2017 was that they wanted to amend, or that you all wanted to amend the rule. If you've changed your mind, we can simply continue to give A through F grades how we currently give them. The department can report.
Okay, so nowhere in writing does it say we have to get this ready for the 18-19 school year? It's a yes or no question?
No.
Okay.
Can I ask a follow-up on that? I apologize, Steve, but it's rationally related to your line of questioning, and I can hold if you prefer until you're finished, but it is related to the question that you just asked. Madam Chair, may I ask?
Can you just wait until he's finished, please?
Sure.
The next question I have is, when did the department see the changes in green?
Members of the department saw the changes early November. The superintendent in particular was privy to the changes on November 16th. As Mr. Walker said, all board members received a copy of the draft, which included the vast majority of the green language on that date. There has been some additional green language added, and that relates to the department's phone call with the U.S. Department of Ed and the changes that they requested to the ESSA plan.
And when was that?
I believe, correct me, somewhere around December 22nd-ish.
Leanne, do you remember the date of that call with the U.S. Feds? Wait a second.
The afternoon.
So just for clarification, so that the Department of Education did not have feedback or did not have input into the green, into that language. Our team saw it, actually got called before I saw it, but we did not have feedback. It was more of a, here it is, and much of that was as much of a surprise to us as it was to many of you. So I don't want folks to think we had input into the green other than what was discussed through the ESSA process.
So that was a change from the November 16th email. The November 16th email had a change that was put in green December 22nd.
That's correct.
Okay. I was going to save this till later, but I think it's appropriate now before we make the decision to move this from action to discussion. And this comes from Indiana Insight, page 3, January 8th, 18. An independent review of state plans for implementing the Every Student Succeeds Act, ESSA, conducted by nonprofits, Bellwether Education Partners, and the Collaborative for Student Success, finds that Indiana's plan is one of the 10 best in the country. The review lauds Indiana's plan as a model for other states, not only for its content, but also for its ease in readability and clarity. Indiana receives praise for an accountability model that balances proficiency and growth, and for a school improvement strategy that commits to taking strong evidence-based actions in schools that continue to suffer from low performance, and sets ambitious high bars for low-performing schools to demonstrate that they've made sustained progress. And that's a quote from Indiana Insight. Now, that being said, why are we even considering this when we're considered, and they even identified our accountability process as one of the 10 best in the country by the feds? Why aren't we giving a chance for the current model to work through its process to see if we need to tweak it? And there may be tweaks that are needed in the future, but why are we even considering this?
I thought the feds have said that our growth, the way we're determining growth in our current rule, does not comply with their intentions for ESSA.
Who says that?
So,
I don't know who said that.
in the theme of putting the cart before the horse here, I believe that there was another presentation to be delivered after mine by somebody from the department to discuss the changes recommended by the feds, but it's my understanding that yes, that capping all indicators at 100 is now part of the updated ESSA plan.
But that's not a part of our current rule that we're operating under, and it's not part of our current accountability system.
Correct.
And that's why we're trying to move forward to.
May I ask my follow-up?
Yes, go ahead, Kate.
So going back to this question about wanting a statutory site that directs the board.
I'm sorry, Katie, I can't hear you.
Apologize, better?
Yep.
Better, thanks.
That there's some sort of statutory site that you could provide or anyone could provide indicating the rationale or the directive to move forward with the accountability today for 1819. Do you recall those questions, Chad?
Yes, I do.
What is the relationship between accountability and grad pathways?
So that was one of the things when drafting this proposed rule, is that obviously with the board establishing graduation pathways, in many cases, the graduation pathways established by this board are more rigorous or require more than the current college and career readiness indicator requires. So one of the things that has been done in the proposed rule is an update of the college and career readiness indicator to reflect the fact that the point of the pathways is to ensure students are college and career ready, and that schools receive credit for students being college and career ready if one of their students were to accomplish a pathway. So that is one of the things that's been reflected in this rule.
So I mentioned that just because I think it's important, again, for holistic and then accurate understanding that these things run in parallel. They interact, and that it would be intellectually dishonest to suggest that there would be any statutory directive that would provide us black letter guidance on the timeline that we are required to use critical thinking in aligning these different decisions that have been made and understanding as the policymaking board for the state of Indiana how to best align those in order to get the outcomes that we need for students. Is that correct?
Yes.
Are you saying we would have to make these changes because of grad pathways for 18-19?
I'm suggesting that if you.
Yes, no.
No, I mean, if you don't
No,
want that
because
aligned,
we're not,
then no.
yeah, because we're not under implementation of that yet. Dr. Freitas.
I'd like to know the consequences of delaying the vote today. I'm still a little unclear, and if you covered that right at the start of the meeting and I missed it, sorry for that, but I would like to hear from maybe Brian or Chad on that particular issue. Then I have a question for Brian.
Yeah, again, the consequences of delaying the vote to approve language for publication today is that the timeline for rulemaking will be pushed back until language is approved, and until that day, we will continue to not publish a rule for public comment.
So it'll also delay implementation for an entire school year?
Yes.
And are there implications of that also? What are the implications of that?
The implications of that is simply that schools will continue to receive an A through F grade based on the rule the board has in place. It will have nothing to do with ESSA, and it will be based on how you have placed schools in the past.
What does that do to the implementation of pathways, which we voted on last meeting?
Nothing to the
implication?
to the implementation of pathways. However, students completing pathways will not be recognized as college and career ready insofar as the rule is concerned.
I'd like our chief of staff to approach the podium. Brian, you have some reflections on this comments you'd like to share?
Yeah, so I want to make a comment on the previous comment about the department being involved, and correct me if I'm wrong, I was not at this meeting, but I believe there was a 3-hour meeting with the superintendent regarding this rule and the proposed changes, and I'm not sure that was done with any other board member. So.
And when did that happen approximately?
After the language was presented to us, not prior to the language. That's what we were saying.
Exactly right.
Right, so there was no input prior to the language.
The meeting was to receive input.
Correct. The question was, did we have input into the green language? The answer is no. Did we have?
That meeting was for that purpose. With all due respect, that meeting was to solicit input.
You're saying you did have an opportunity, a 3-hour meeting with the superintendent to review the green language and have her comment on that. Is that what you're stating? Okay.
I think we have enough information to go ahead and take board.
Were any changes made after that input? Just curious.
Yes, the superintendent staff, and Maggie's coming up because this is something that her and I have worked together on, but the superintendent staff recognized that the college and career readiness indicator had to be updated for purposes of complying with ESSA, if that was what the board wanted, because once the grad pathways were fully implemented, the college and career readiness indicator would simply become a subset of the data used to calculate the graduation rate. At that point, the college and career readiness would no longer be a standalone indicator that identified something that another indicator hadn't already identified. So that input was taken, and that was the genesis of revisions to the college and career readiness indicator as well as the grad rate indicator.
So could I now refer back to make a comment that's different?
Sure.
The thing I want to do real quick here is make sure that, because I appreciate Gordon's motion, appreciate the fact of wanting to have a discussion. You know I like to do that too, right? The thing I don't like is that we're talking about not being transparent. And I want to be clear. November, we got an email asking for feedback. I actually provided feedback. And actually there's been articles written about this that said there was a committee of 4 and whatever. And I kept asking, was I one of those, because I gave feedback to that email. This has been transparent to board members and to everyone as we've worked through this process. As BJ said, he didn't give feedback because he knew that was in the process. I just want to make sure that the public listening to this, no one has been left out for discussion.
Now, if you don't like the mode of that, which Gordon, I can appreciate that, okay? I get that piece. But I just want to make sure that everybody understands that nobody on this board has been left out of that process. And I think that's important to be said at this point. I just want to make sure everybody understands that. Madam Superintendent, since it's my motion, may I conclude?
Yes,
concluding
please.
remarks before we take a vote?
Please do.
I'm not saying there isn't transparency among board members, but 2 points in response to that. Number one, there certainly has been public transparency here in crafting the language. Absolutely has not. So that's the purpose of the motion, is to make sure that there is full public transparency before pen is put on the paper and we vote on language that starts this process. That's number one. And I feel like this is a relatively small issue, but in the same sense, it's also a very, very important issue for this board, that we operate in a sense of transparency, and that means transparency to the public that we're working to benefit. And I just feel like from a process standpoint, we need to work on our transparency so that we can have, as I'm proposing today, have that discussion in public and give the public time to digest our conversation today before we take any board action on any proposed rules. Thank you.
Okay, so we have a motion on the floor, and do we have a second? So all those in favor, we'll take roll call. Roll call, please.
No.
No. No.
Yes.
Yes.
No.
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 Yes.
Yes.
Yes. So do we have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Do we have approval of the minutes for December 6, 2017?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Statement of chair, yesterday signified our one-year anniversary in our office, and what a year it has been. It's like in dog years. So I do want to thank the Department of Education staff. They have been nails. We've got a great team. And to the field, I appreciate your voices, and I appreciate the role that you are taking. I think it is noticed and it is appreciated. Continue to be focused on kids. It is, again, being noticed. So thank you for that. Board members' comments and reports. Any? Great. Everybody's, Dr. Ernest.
I do on this one. One, I think it's just important to note, and then it plays into the comment that I want to make. I was proud last night that the governor mentioned the State Board of Education in his address. I don't know that I've heard that before, and I'm sure it probably has, but he said the Indiana State Board of Education took a crucial step by approving new graduation pathways for high school students beginning in 2019. I think that's a part of his audacious goals, and I'm excited about those audacious goals. To that end, I would like to publicly thank the Horizon Education Alliance. Back on December 15th, they invited state leaders to Elkhart County, specifically to Goshen, to have conversations with schools, particularly around the work that they're doing with connecting business and industry with schools, with all community stakeholders. It was an excellent meeting. Jason Harrison, their director of facilitation, facilitated the whole meeting.
We had the chance to tour Bentler and have in-depth conversations about how they were preparing employees, how they needed to be preparing employees. School leaders were able to have a conversation around that. Mayor Jeremy Stutzman from Goshen, I shout out to him. He did a great job of also helping facilitate this. He is really progressive in his thinking on how you connect all the stakeholders within a county, within a city. And then in my work group, they broke us up into work groups to facilitate, and I would be remiss if I did not give a shout out to Superintendent John Trout from Concord Schools and Principal Drew Wood from Northridge High School. It was awesome to work with them. They were very solutions oriented in how do we do this and wanting to do that. And so I just wanted to give a shout out to the work that I know is being done in communities, particularly up there with that Horizon Education Alliance. And I know there's other groups like ECHO and so forth that we certainly need to have conversations with as well. So thank you for the moment.
Any other comments? Okay, hearing none, we are moving on to public comments. Are there any?
Thank you very much for allowing me to address you. You're a very busy group. My name is Sue Dillon, and I'm president of the Central Time Coalition. I sent you an email a week ago to alert you to and inform you about House and this is Cheryl Gettelfinger, I'm sorry, and to alert you to House Concurrent Resolution number 2 that has been introduced or is going to be reviewed in the legislature. And I think this is a very important resolution that affects Indiana's students, the education, their safety. It is concerning it's asking that a special study committee review the issues that were brought up in the resolution that we consider as a result of our shift of sunlight schedule that happened 12 years ago. We think it's time that they look at it and see. It's a safety issue for students. It's an educational issue. Biorhythms, we know something about that. The Nobel Prize just came out about that. We think that our sunlight schedule is definitely adverse for students in their education. So that's why we wanted to inform you about that. Today I brought you as a handout, you may have it with you. It is a map showing you the boundaries for the Central Time Zone. We are in the Eastern Time Zone, so we're way out of our normal sunlight schedule. And I want to ask you if you had any questions. I hope you've had time to read it. I know you're busy people, but if you haven't had a chance to read it, the resolution, I hope you'll take time to read. Do you have any questions?
I appreciate you coming back. It seemed about 2 or 3 years ago, correct?
Yes,
You were
we've been working on this
on the same issue, so I congratulate you on your persistence on this particular issue. Do you have any data concerning the economic impact of changing the time zone in Indiana, or any other indirect consequences of this?
As far as business goes?
Yes.
There's a perception, it was initially changed in the 1960s to accommodate businesses, because at that time they were conducting transactions by telephone, so it was important to have somebody on the other end of the line. That's totally changed, of course, today. Business transactions are conducted by the internet. Business leaders in Indiana say Eastern has no benefit to business in Indiana today, but there's a definite disadvantage to conducting business with the West Coast. California being the 6th largest economy in the world, not just America, but the world. There's very little time frame for interacting between businesses in Indiana and 3 hours difference in California. So it's a definite disadvantage. Is that what your question
Yes,
you were asking?
my second question, and I think final, is hopefully your bill will go through the process and so forth and so on. But I remember 3 years ago making a recommendation to you, which was if the legislation does not pass, I suggested maybe going to school districts directly, because actually school districts can set the time whereby school starts, correct? And so they could implement, in a sense, a central or Eastern time schedule for their students. You understand what I'm saying? And did you follow up on that? Did you approach any schools, and what was the response?
51 school boards have adopted resolutions in support of being restored to the central time zones schedule, to the sunlight schedule. We're talking.
Right, sunlight schedule. So did they supported the resolution, but did they actually do something about it and within their own school district change the pickup time for students?
No, they didn't.
Okay.
And in fact, I'm sure you're aware that the American Academy of Pediatrics recommends that schools for teens don't start till 8:30. But in Indiana, that's 9:30 because it's all based on sunlight, and that's really impossible.
So there's a lot of lip service, but when it comes time for action, frankly, there's not a lot of action that's being taken. So the legislative route is a way to bring about the change that you're seeking.
We want to get the issues aired, and they've been buried. It's never been given a hearing. This time it is scheduled to the Roads and Transportation Committee, Representative Soliday, and we hope that he will allow that hearing, the issues to be heard and approve it going to a study committee.
Great to see you again. Hopefully you won't be here in 3 years again
I hope so, too.
to
I
ask
do
us
have
to do
other
the same
things to
thing.
do.
So good luck to you.
Did you have a question?
I have a question.
Yes.
Not really a question, but as a non-morning person, I'm 100% in support of your efforts. If you drive down I-69 on your map here, Bowling Green, Kentucky, which is due south, latitude central, Nashville, Tennessee, due south central, Birmingham, Alabama, due south central. So I just think from a consistency standpoint, it makes sense for us to be on Central Time. So I'm supportive of what you're trying to do. I just think you're going to have a very difficult time convincing anyone over in the on that end of Market Street to take up an issue that they want to never see again. So
It's very divisive having the state split the way it is too.
But we can't take a vote on it here.
No.
All we can do is
No, it's not
make
your
an
vote.
advisory.
However, I would point out that you could support the study, and that's what it calls for this time. I think our previous resolutions have called for Central Time, restorations. Now we're calling for a study.
Well, and I think your point is well taken as to starting times of schools, which, I think most of us, anyone who's looked at the data understands that school starting, kids standing out at the bus stop at 6:30 in the morning is absolutely ludicrous.
It is.
And so schools themselves, to Dr. Freitas's point, really need to reexamine, doing what's best for the kids and not maybe what's best for their transportation schedules. So thank you.
I'm just curious, in the statement here, being unsafe, we've had 12 years of this now. What data do we have comparing any kind of incidents with students in schools over the past 12 years versus the previous decades?
Well, we know we've tracked incidents that occurred in the dark. And we know they didn't have the dark before. We've had girls raped. We've had kids hit by cars. We've had kids robbed on the street. These didn't occur. These aren't going to occur in the dark. I mean,
None of those things happened before it was dark?
They could have, but there's...
To the change of time?
we weren't really tracking this prior to this.
We should have some kind of data to show
And
incidents,
one of the
crime, those type of
disadvantages
things.
of, one of the problems with tracking this is they're typically reported in the local papers, and we don't have access to those.
We really don't know the unsafe claim, whether it's accurate.
You're right, but I would have to point out that it's nice to have everything backed up by statistics, but there is common sense that we also have.
We do a lot of things in the dark, though.
Right.
I mean,
Yes, we
we'll take 10,000 people into a football game at night, people walking around doing a lot of things. We have a lot of events in the evening, so I just want to be clear that when we talk about unsafe, and I won't go any further into the darkness, but I know, but I was just curious. I think it's unfair to make claims that we can't substantiate. That's my point.
Well, we do know those incidents have occurred, and they were quite a lot, and they occurred in the dark, and we don't really have them occurring in the light.
And school start times are local decisions, correct?
Probably.
They're absolutely local decisions. So each school district can decide when they start school.
And some have altered. Lawrence Township. Yeah, they did.
That is available to any school district to change start times. There are a lot of other things that drive that, right? I mean, there's, you get into transportation issues, after-school events, a lot of things affect school start times.
Right.
I mean, we have years of data on school start times, appropriate start times for teenagers. How many schools across the country have changed high school start times to reflect the data?
There's a lot of conversation about this in the news. I mean, if you're watching for it.
I'm sorry, what was that? I'm sorry.
There's conversation around the United States about start times of schools.
Sure. And
Wall Street Journal's had articles. It's a national conversation right now.
For the past 30 years.
But we have a disadvantage here that the recommendation's 9:30, and it's not really feasible in Indiana.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Superintendent and members of the board. John O'Neill with ISTA. I appreciate the opportunity just to make a few comments about the rulemaking. You probably don't want to hear about it anymore after that discussion, but our comments are more about some of the substantive issues, regardless of the vote that was taken on the timeline. And we realize that today is just the starting point, whatever happens, of the longer rulemaking process. And we also realize that there's going to be a public comment period, and we will certainly encourage our members to weigh in as educators in the field. But we do have some concerns with the diminished weight that growth would play in the new calculations. We've always been at ISTA a supporter of growth. It gives the opportunity for all students, regardless of their backgrounds and challenges, to show their learning progress and improvement. And I know that this board has wrestled with this issue in the past, the debate on growth versus proficiency and what the weight should be. And we would encourage you to be cautious in that rulemaking process. And I was going to say that, we'd like the board to slow down, take time, gain more input. I wasn't aware that the discussion this morning was going to take that issue up already, but really, irrespective of the timeline, our main concern is really looking at whether growth should be maintained and not phased out, especially for high school. It's just something that we feel is very important to keep in that calculation. So I appreciate the opportunity, and hopefully we can move forward on that. Yes?
Question. Thank you for your comments. When you think about growth, do you see it only from a standardized test perspective, or do you see other areas that growth could be used?
Well, we have issues, across the board with the emphasis on standardized tests. And I think that growth, whether we're talking about, we live currently with test scores used in these calculations. So, our concerns, we've generally, our members have long standing had an issue with reliance on test scores. But given the reality we live in, at least showing students have the opportunity to demonstrate that they've improved. In that sense, yes, growth is preferable, I believe. I think that there should be other ways to calculate that other than test scores. There are other metrics that could be used to demonstrate growth in addition to just a one snapshot grade. I don't know if that's what you're asking or.
I was curious too, is from a growth perspective, is this more of a high school issue? We measure growth versus a 3 through 8 question?
I think that growth should be used for all grades. If we're going to use these metrics to stamp a grade on a student, I think that it should apply to all grades. And as I mentioned, using test scores for that is not our preferred way of doing things. But if those grades are if test scores are going to be used, then I think that growth should at least be factored into that. And I know that, this has been an issue for some time, and the intersection of policy shifts under ESSA and the pathways has kind of pivoted in a way to this new conversation. But, it's just something that I think take with caution as we move forward.
Thank you. Oh, Mr. Walker.
Thank you for being here. I just had a quick question. Apparently, you've had an opportunity to see the proposed rule that's before us today. And I agree with what you were saying in terms of the reliance on standardized testing. And one of the things that I find attractive about the proposed rule is that it reduces the reliance on I-Step 10 or I-Learn, whatever we're doing now, from 40% of the weight of the school grade down to 25%. So it seems, I guess my question to you is, do you find it more preferable to reduce the amount of the grade that's dependent on standardized testing, or to keep what we have now where it's at 40%, but have a growth?
Can we do both? And we do support reducing the weight of test scores. But I was joking, but I'm also serious in that, yes, we would like to see the continuation of growth being used while also balancing out a reduction in test scores. But, I'd have to survey our members to see if it's one or the other, how our membership feels about that. I think both are important.
Well, I think in part it's a shift that's happening here, philosophically, hopefully, that's the way I interpret it, from getting away from talking about measuring students based upon their improvement just on a standardized test to measuring their improvement toward actually graduating with some skills they can support themselves with. And I think hopefully whatever the new rule is will reflect that. And the whole conversation around growth, to me, is inextricably tied to standardized testing model of evaluation when we need to be looking at other things. Thank you.
And we still have yet to see what will happen this legislative session too on I don't know if there's, any changes or tweaks to I-Learn or what's on the horizon. So we will stay updated on that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's it for general public comment.
Okay. So we go on down to, I'm assuming no best practice, correct? So a consent agenda has CTE report, technical amendments, SQR teams, and A through F appeals for the 3 schools listed in accreditation status placement. Do we have a motion to accept?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? At this time, I see no adjudication, so we go down to new business action items. Item A, the Seventh-day Advent Freeway accreditation.
Good morning.
Morning.
Appreciate the time here this morning. My name is Nicole Mattson. I'm the superintendent for the Seventh-day Adventist organization here in Indiana. I'm here today to ask for the immediate granting of freeway accreditation for a brand-new school in Evansville. This school would serve a primarily Hispanic population. It's a Hispanic community there of underprivileged kids. We hope to have a math and science emphasis. We are very interested in looking into a dual immersion program there also. I want you to be a little briefed, sorry, I'm very nervous, on our system of education. We are longstanding. Our first school opened in 1872 in Battle Creek, Michigan. South Bend Junior Academy here in Indiana just celebrated its 100th anniversary. We are actually, I misstated in the proposal, we are the first largest Protestant school system in the world. We have about 90,000 students in early education through our university level schools in the NAD, or the North American Division, which encompasses Mexico and Canada and the United States. We do design our own curriculum that is Bible-based, and we use major companies like everyone else does, Kendall Hunt and McGraw-Hill and Harcourt Brace, and we're very devoted to our students' success in the academic world and into citizenship and being an active member of society with Christian values. And so I am here today asking that you grant us immediate freeway accreditation because the school is already undergoing a $170,000 renovation right now to get ready for the students, and they're going to need vouchers. They're going to need money for tuition. So that's why I'm here today, and hoping that you would consider this request. Do you have any questions for me?
Any questions?
Move to approve.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Discussion.
I'm sorry, discussion. I'm sorry.
So I would like to ask staff, what specifically, so we're waiving statutes in this, could you just specify for?
So freeway accreditation is a form of state-approved accreditation. Last session, the legislature passed an immediate version of freeway accreditation, so schools don't have to go through a one-year observational period anymore. They can just get immediate accreditation through the board. There would be certain statutes that will be waived around curriculum and certain curricular materials that would apply to regular schools that the Seventh-day Adventist school would use their own. And I believe they would also eventually seek accreditation through the Seventh-day Adventist organization, but in order to receive choice scholarships for the next school year, they would have to receive immediate freeway accreditation.
Is staff making a recommendation?
I have a memo where my recommendation is to approve based on the network that they're a part of here in Indiana, as well as the Great Lakes area, that there's sufficient data and history that shows that these schools are effective, that these schools are support student achievement academically and through their values practice, that I think there's sufficient evidence that us opening the school in Evansville will be successful. There, both myself and Ron Sandlin went and visited and saw the remodeling start. So I feel confident in that the network of support for these schools will yield good results for the students in Evansville.
Are there any concerns from staff?
Not technically. I mean, the only concern that I had was around their math data in their current voucher schools. But Nicole is the new superintendent. She's shifted focus for their teacher and leadership to focus more on instructional-based practices to be further aligned with Indiana standards, whereas previously it wasn't as aligned with Indiana standards. They were aligned more with their curriculum, but she is leading an effort to redo their teaching and instructional practices. So I feel confident in her leadership to shift the academic achievement in math.
And we're talking about a school in Evansville, correct?
Correct.
Just give him the opportunity, does BJ have any thoughts on the addition of this?
Nope.
Not to put you on the spot, sorry, BJ.
Completely support.
Alicia, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Dr.
Okay.
Yeager.
You said, you mentioned real quickly in your comments, regular schools. What are you referring to?
So traditional publics, charters, and any school that's not under freeway accreditation has to follow specific statutory and regulatory guidance and
Would it
guidelines.
be public, private, parochial?
If it's not freeway accredited, then yes. If they seek accreditation through freeway though and have certain statutory and regulatory guidelines waived, then they're under a different system.
Okay. In your comments, Alicia, you referred to something the superintendent is doing. So can I ask the superintendent a question? You said, Alicia, you stated that you had a concern regarding math in the other existing schools. Is that what I'm seeing here, that all these are existing schools? And you mentioned that you had some discomfort there, for lack of a better term, and the superintendent, you're moving towards, could you explain to us what that is, moving from to?
Sure. Currently, we have our own standards that are built into our curriculum. We take the Iowa assessment tests as a nationwide assessment test. Currently, I am visiting schools that have shown proficiency in math areas and gleaning ideas and strategies from them. We've hired someone, we're paying someone to take the Indiana standards and align them with our curriculum to make it easier on our schools. You should also know that 2/3 of our schools are 4 teachers and fewer. Our largest school in Indiana here is Indiana Academy. It's a high school boarding academy with 119 students.
Where's that located?
It's in Cicero, Indiana.
Okay.
And our smallest school has 5 children up in Elkhart, Indiana. So when you're talking about test scores and how feasible those are, it's difficult when you have very small class sizes to make anything, any large growth jumps. And we're also experiencing a big influx of Burmese and Hispanic refugee type students in our schools. So that's been a challenge too, and we're also addressing that with means of using different effective tutoring techniques and Rosetta Stone, anything we can to help make their English skills more proficient, because we know that that's a factor in math.
And you're moving the math standards closer to Indiana standards?
We are.
Okay. Do you have, other than yourself, do you have other folks making sure that those standards are being met?
So this is the Indiana Conference, and we're under the umbrella of the Lake Union Conference, which is Michigan, Indiana, Illinois, Wisconsin, and the Lake Region, which is primarily the African American Conference, but they have schools and churches in all those other states, in Michigan too, if I didn't say that. So they are my umbrella, and yes, they are helping me through this process.
And they'll be visiting your schools?
I'm sorry?
They'll be visiting your schools and following up with your curricula and instruction?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great.
I think overall, as just an educational system, we feel we're always working for good, better, best, and we're always addressing the math issue, and I know that many schools are.
Oh, sure. And when do you anticipate these math alignment to Indiana standards to take place?
She's working on it right now, so probably we'll have them within the next month.
And you need freeway designation so that, I think you mentioned, so that your students can apply for and receive academic scholarships?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Do you have a projection as to what the impact that will be for you next fall? And when will if this is approved and your students can get scholarships, when will that take place? Does that take place immediately? Does it take place in this fall? Alicia, maybe it's a question for you or legal counsel.
So the Choice Scholarship opens up in March, goes through March through September is the enrollment. If you approve Freeway for them today, they could start accepting students in March.
Under scholarship?
Under scholarship.
Will the current students receive scholarships?
For the next school year, for
What's the next school year?
There are no current students. They would open the next school year. Yeah, I
Okay.
apologize for not making that clear.
brand new
Okay.
school.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Roll call, please.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you.
The next item on the agenda, Calumet College of St. Joe Teacher Prep Program.
Good morning, Superintendent, members of the board. As a reminder, the department reviews all new teacher preparation licensure programs prior to recommending final approval to you as the board. All new proposals are reviewed by a committee that we call INPREP, which stands for Indiana Educator Preparation Program Review Team. And it's comprised of representatives from higher ed, building, and district level administration, teachers, and content specialists when needed. We have 3 proposals for your consideration today. Each have been reviewed and by majority, though not always unanimously, recommended for your approval. And the first one we have is Calumet College of St. Joseph, Exceptional Needs, Mild Intervention, grades P12 or preschool through 12. And Dr. Don Green, Program Director for Undergraduate Field Experience of Calumet College, has agreed to attend. And I have not seen her yet, so I don't know.
Oh, there she is in the back.
Don, if you want to come on up to the front, sorry. And she can answer any additional program-specific questions that you may have. Dr. Freitas?
Good morning, welcome.
Thank you.
This is an add-on license, and the programs that they're currently running, have they met all of our standards, and are they aligned with Indiana standards? Are they accredited? There's been no issue over the years, correct?
Right.
Great, I just wanted to ensure. I asked that question of all the new programs. I was particularly interested in your Appendix A of your document, which was your clinical assessments. I thought that was really well done. Could you just take 2 or 3 minutes to share with us your philosophy of clinical experiences and how you've set up that system?
Well, what we look for is we look for an opportunity for students to get in the field as quickly as possible. And so we are very fortunate to have Companion Academy and some other areas where our students can really get out there and they can experience what it's like to be that special education teacher prior to actually being a practicing teacher. And so with Companion Academy being our partner, and they have been our partner for several years, even in our general education, our elementary education program, that has allowed us to be able to do summer practicums as well as evening practicums when normally the students are in class. So they get that experience no matter what. It's not dependent on their class schedule.
And approximately how many hours do they spend out in the field?
Our students, by the time they graduate, will spend 400 hours out in the field.
Okay, terrific. The other question I had, and we'll give you an opportunity to talk about it, is the use of case studies in the program. I thought that was intriguing, and obviously within a classroom setting to use case studies to provide real world experiences is a way to enhance the clinical experiences. Can you talk about how did that come about? How are they constructed?
Well, what we found is that relationships, of course, build the best teachers when they can build those relationships with their students ahead of time. And one of the ways that you can build that relationship is getting to know the student. You get to know the student by getting to know everything that's going on with them, actually meeting with the family, being able to see what their educational career has been like since they began, and then getting to find out what those problems are, and then coming up with intervention strategies to be able to engage some of those problems, and then seeing what has happened to the student as they progress through their educational career.
I congratulate you on a well-designed program.
Thank you.
It's really outstanding. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Just two quick questions, and again, thank you for all of your work. And this is actually separate from the proposal here, but I'm curious, in-service teachers and their access to this licensure program. Will you market this to current teachers, and will it be accessible to them?
Absolutely. That's one of the reasons why we wanted to partner with Companion Academy, because if they're teaching during the day, they don't have time for the clinical hours. And so being available during the weekend, being a residential program that offers educational services throughout the day and even on weekends and during summers, those certain in-service teachers will have the opportunity to actually experience those clinical hours in special needs.
Great, thank you. Second question, do you keep retention records of your teaching candidates?
Our teaching candidates?
Or your students, once they get into the profession, do you keep retention records on them and how long they stay in the profession?
We try to as much as we can. We try and, at the last year that they're actually with us, the first thing that we do is we get up-to-date information on them, and we try and keep in touch with them for at least 5 years. Obviously, as that time wears on, we lose track of them. However, we do have a core of our candidates that actually stay in the area and begin to work in our local school districts.
Thank you. Move to approve.
We have a second?
Second.
Roll call, please.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Congratulations. Thank you.
Thank you.
Moving on to Crystal House Teacher Prep Program.
Yes, you may recall, I believe it was a year ago, Crystal House Teacher Preparation Program proposal was approved for secondary education. And we mentioned at that time that they would be bringing forth an elementary proposal, which they have worked on, and it has been reviewed, and we would like to recommend it for approval. It will be known as Indy Teach, not Crystal House, so if you see Indy Teach, that will be the name of both programs, actually. So, at this time, we have Mr. Kerry Damke, who's a principal of Crystal House South, and Sarah Weimer, head of Curriculum and Instruction, and I believe they are both here to answer any questions that you may have.
Dr. Freitas?
Good morning. Good morning. Good to see you again.
Thank you.
The question is, it's a transition to teaching program, I understand, and it's mirrored based on the other one we previously approved at a different level. Will this program be open to people beyond your particular school?
Well, it depends on how you want to look at that. So yes, but no. So what happens is those individuals who are selected enter into a paid agreement with the school. And so it's a one-year apprenticeship program. They receive compensation, but after that one-year period, there's nothing that binds them to the organization. So they could choose to leave and go teach somewhere else afterwards. It's our hope that we'll make a compelling offer and keep a lot of those folks, but there's nothing that would not prevent them from going elsewhere.
The program is predicated then on employment at your school, and they are teaching while they're learning how to become a teacher. Is that a fair characterization?
So they'll be employed as an apprentice teacher. They'll have about 1,500 hours or so of teaching in the classroom alongside a mentor teacher as well as an instructional coach. He'll support them through a competency-based program. It is paid. Our bet, if you will, is that we can attract more people into the field if they receive compensation during that training period. For a lot of folks who are career changers or they didn't elect to go into education the first go around, the idea of spending a considerable amount of money to get retrained to be a teacher, we think is a deterrent. And we're struggling to find teachers. So we're working really hard at being creative and trying to attract more people into the field, particularly minority candidates.
Is the apprentice the teacher of record legally?
No.
So how does that work? They're placed with a licensed certified teacher as an assistant within the classroom, and how does that all work? Is it similar to student teaching where there's a transition from observing to actually teaching? Is that how it works?
Yeah, it would look similar to that. What we do is a gradual release model. So in the beginning, they have very little direct responsibility, and then as it progresses, it becomes more of a co-teaching model, and then eventually they begin to take over the classroom.
So a question for Scott, my last question. So these programs that will likely approve today and the one we approved at a prior meeting, a team will go out and review it on a regular schedule.
Correct.
And are they required to meet national accreditation also?
Yeah,
the program.
The first part of your comment, we are recommending 3 years initial
3 years,
recommendation.
okay.
I neglected to mention that. And we are going to conduct an annual state review comprised of a state team while they pursue CAPE accreditation. So they will be following the same national standards and expectations of any other teacher preparation program. If for whatever reason CAPE changes their policy and does not agree to review types of programs that are non-higher ed or not accredited regionally, then we would still follow the same standards statewide.
I'd like to emphasize something you just said, that we are treating this school like any other teacher preparation program. There's no lower standards or different standards or anything different. So we hold all institutions to the same high standards.
Exactly, because in theory, their completers will receive a license and they could teach anywhere in the state of Indiana. So we want to make sure we're following the same standards.
Or through reciprocity, they could teach in 30, 40 other states in the country.
Right.
Okay,
exactly.
Thank you.
Dr. Bertram?
Yes. In the spirit of treating them like all other institutions, why a 3-year accreditation?
We would like to give them an opportunity because they're new, and actually any new teacher prep program, we initially recommend 3 years so that we can visit them annually. After the 3rd year, we'll come back and recommend 4 years or discontinuation or whatever whatever the team may decide at that point.
So any university that wanted to start a new teacher preparation program would go under a 3-year accreditation?
Right, and that's aligned to CAPE.
Would be the proposal.
That would be the proposal for 3 years, and then I would come back, or we would come back in 3 years with a follow-up.
So there really aren't, I can see in a higher ed institution where a 3-year accreditation would actually be very problematic for them. Or staff, not knowing whether that accreditation would continue after 3 years. Are those same risks present in this particular model? Because I see it a little different because of the way they're going to apprentice with existing teachers as opposed to hiring faculty and all the things that would take place in higher ed.
I'm not going to say it's easier, I don't want to use that word, but I don't think it would be as problematic for this type of a program as compared to a higher ed program.
Well, an undergraduate
because of faculty.
Yeah, because in an undergraduate program, if you were moving into a teacher preparation program and uncertain whether the 4th-year accreditation would be there, you could graduate and have an institution not accredited.
Right.
So that risk is different.
Right,
than in this
exactly.
model. So a 3-year accreditation, again, doesn't carry the same risk as, okay.
No, and the goal is in 3 years, we will provide a follow-up report and we'll have some statistics and data to share with you about the results of the review. So that way you can look at it and make a determination. So the 3 years is not meant to be a bad thing, it's just to give us a chance to review them manually because they're brand new. I
That
mean,
makes sense. I just wanted to look at the differences in a traditional,
right.
very supportive of this model. I think it's going to be.
Further questions or
Not a saw
discussion?
hand, but
I just wanted to compliment the team on that innovative strategy to remove barriers for students who want to transition. I think that's on the right track for trying to recruit more folks into the profession, especially in the current economy, where that is especially challenging. So kudos to you for being innovative and trying to recruit top talent into your program.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Roll call.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Thank you. University of Southern Indiana Teacher Prep
We
Program.
went from Calumet up north to University of...
We've hit the whole state.
Southern Indiana, excuse me, I said Evansville, that's your rival. University of Southern Indiana, district level administration superintendent program, and we have Dr. Paul Theobald, professor of education, and Dr. Zane Mitchell, dean of the Pott College of Education, University of Southern Indiana.
Move approval.
I would like to second that as a proud USI alumni.
Roll call, please. Oh,
No question,
did
Dr.
you move?
Yes, I move, but we do
Do you have a
motions
discussion?
first,
Okay,
right?
go
And then we
ahead,
have
sorry.
discussion?
Yeah, I was
Okay.
just trying to, I was like, you're good, go home. So go ahead.
Thanks for being here this morning. I went through all your syllabi, all, was it 80 credits or 60 credits or?
60, yeah.
And the rigor there is outstanding. And the question I had was on your internship. And a lot of us believe that in superintendent programs that the experience students have in the school with a superintendent is critical. Because we can take a lot of courses in a doctoral program and may or may not have that experience working with an outstanding superintendent. Can you talk about that internship? It's called Internship in School District Administration. What does that look like? How long is it? And what's the typical interaction with that superintendent who's mentoring that aspiring superintendent?
Sure. It's 6 months, and will spill into the summer months where school professionals will have more time to spend, like 8-hour days as opposed to spending a couple of hours, in days of the week prior to being able to spend that full time. So there'll be paired with a mentor, a university supervisor, and a mentor in a central office. And we have some expectations for kinds of things that they're going to be involved with. Data-driven assessment, for instance, community school relations. So we have some things that we want to see on our side, and over and above that, we want our candidates, our interns, to be helping the school where they come to do that internship, helping the district, rather. One is with assessment plans that might then trigger staff development plans, et cetera. So being involved in a way that will meet our expectations, but also help that particular school district do what it wants to do.
There was two statements in your report that trigger this next question, and it pertains to the internship. And in the description of the internship, it did say 6 months. And in another place in your document, it said the program is designed for working adults. And so as I think about possibly a teacher or a current school principal in a position going through a doctoral program, how do they take 6 months off to do a 6-month internship?
And they can, and that's my initial comments were, during the school year, they're only going to be able to collect a number of hours each week. And this will have to be done either before the school day or after the school day, after their full-time commitment as a teacher. Once the school year is over, then they can go on to a schedule in the central office that's a very typical 8-hour day, so that the whole experience adds up to 500 hours. Fewer hours during the school year, more hours during the summer.
So it's 500 minimum, you're saying. And is the program going to seek national recognition?
Yes, for CAPE and the...
School leadership?
Yeah, right.
And when will that happen, the school leadership part? I'm not so much...
That should all happen, I think, with our next CAPE cycle. CAPE just came to visit in October.
I guess
So
I'm not talking about the CAPE, I'm talking about the national recognition. There's ISLIC and there's other organizations.
Right.
Is that going to happen within a year or so?
It probably...
We require it, so they will have to seek SPA recognition. So that would begin, the process begins upon approval. They would apply, and then they have to have 3 years of data.
So 3 years from now is the answer.
Okay. The other question I had was on your dissertation. And the superintendent's dissertation may be different than a traditional research-based dissertation. Those of us who have gone through doctoral programs, our dissertation was really heavily researched. And it's a research component that may or may not have an application to schools. And in the venue of action research, where doctoral students do something in a school that brings something good to that school, and so they're doing research and they're helping that school at the same time. Is that the design of your program at the dissertation level, that they're doing action research versus a strict formal research dissertation?
Yes.
Okay.
You described it actually very well.
Okay. I think that's really important when we look at doctoral programs, that they have a direct application into the schools. And so they're completing research that's actually helping that particular school. And as a practicing superintendent, that's really the job they're doing, is to help the organization. So I certainly support this notion of all that work in the dissertation being applied to a particular school district in your region. Thanks for answering my questions.
Dr. Bertram?
Yeah, just one question, and I'm very supportive of this proposal. As we look across the state, we have many outstanding school superintendents, and each has an area of expertise, some broader than others, some more narrow. How are we going to get these candidates exposure to other superintendents? You know, one thing to have a mentor, or to work with one district or one superintendent, but do you think it's important to give them exposure to a wide range of views and the way school districts operate around the state? Different school settings, school types.
Yeah, I think that's important, and we could address that with guest speakers.
I'm sorry?
We could have guest speakers to help address that.
Not necessarily time within those school districts, correct?
If they reside in those school districts, they'd have time there, but initially the internship would not be with those.
Yeah, the other thing I would say is that as with doctoral students in all kinds of fields, that's a period of enculturation into the profession. We encourage membership, joining membership, or becoming a member of various professional organizations. And the school administrators' organizations around the state, we would be encouraging them to be involved with those, and there would be another opportunity for them to meet with other superintendents and so on.
The reason I ask the question is because I think there are implications for an individual who may want to go in the EVSC and intern. You may have several who want to do that versus interning perhaps in a small rural district. And what are the career implications for an individual starting in a certain place on what their aspirations are? If you want to be an urban school superintendent, then you need to perhaps be and have exposure to urban schools. If you want to be in a rural school, that would be ideal for you to be there.
I think it's our intention to sort of match those aspirations where they are. You know, that as a career matures, you know, sometimes those things change and those aspirations change and so on. But we have in the internship made allowances for having our candidates leave the central office where they are interning to go visit others particularly if there's very little diversity, for instance, in the school district where they are interning. We want to make sure that they go to other districts to see what the challenges are in the central office in those districts. So we have built that piece in, and as I say, we would at every opportunity bring in people who have distinguished themselves in the superintendency to help our candidates, and then encourage them to be involved in superintendent organizations as well.
Thank you.
I have a quick question.
Dr. Yeager?
I know the students obviously pay fees. Is the mentor, the superintendent mentor, reimbursed in some way?
Typically, we do have some sort of reimbursement plan for mentors. I don't know that we've specifically come up with dollar figures or anything like that.
We have small reimbursement for cooperating teachers. And I would imagine we would be working with something similar.
So that's not in the plan?
It hasn't been addressed, but it can be. You bring up a good point.
Yeah, another concern I would have is in some superintendent contracts, receiving pay during their contracted time may violate their contract. So we need to be cognizant of that as you move forward. Make sure that the mentor superintendent doesn't get themselves in some sort of a jam. So that might be a question you might ask as you seek out mentors, because that could potentially be a big problem for the mentor.
Thank you. Thank you.
Roll call, please.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bogan. Next item on the agenda, and then we will be breaking item E, resolution recognizing Beech Grove City Schools, and I do believe this is coming from INTAS, and I saw Dr. Cole. And the Beech Grove team, sorry. Most important people.
Good morning. Thank you for allowing us to once again come to you with a school district to be recognized for their teacher evaluation process. I want to just note that this will be the 8th district, I believe, that we brought to you for recognition as an exemplary district. And what I want to mention here is that we at INTAS have always believed that it's a process, not a model. And so the eight districts we brought to you include districts who've had RISE, modified RISE, Danielson, a couple of locally developed plans that were created at the local level. Another thing I just want to mention is that I believe this law was passed in 2012, and I think it's really important to note that these districts continue to do this well. And it's a really important statement that I want to make. So I bring to you Beech Grove City Schools, and I'm proud to do this. I want to mention a few things that are in the resolution, and then I'm going to turn it over to Steve Baer, who says he has an hour speech for you to follow.
We'll take it after the meeting.
So, first of all, they've met all the criteria that INTAS has for fidelity of implementation. They have exemplified a supportive, collegial, and transparent system to guide the implementation and support staff. They are a district that has provided time for teachers and administrators to discuss sections of the rubric, leading to greater rubric fluency. We also, as INTAS, when we do this implementation review, we ask for a survey of all staff, and our survey is fairly thorough. And as a result of that survey, we look to see whether staff feel that it's been implemented well and their satisfaction. And on the part of Beech Grove, there was high satisfaction with all aspects of their implementation and their evaluation system. And finally, The BGCS teacher evaluation system was an early TAP adopter and has since designed their latest evaluation plan called the Career Development Model to incorporate the fundamental aspects of the TAP system. I will now turn it over to Steve Baer, who will introduce his team.
Good morning, Superintendent and Board. Thank you for having us today. It is a great honor to have this recognition. As the Assistant Superintendent, it's great to have my support of Dr. Kaiser from a financial standpoint and a philosophical point. It is one of the pillars of our foundation, and it takes the entire team believing in this in order for it to work effectively. Also, I want to introduce Principal Walters, and she's one of our principals that implements it with fidelity in our district, which makes it so successful. As Dr. Cole mentioned, it is something that's, all of our principals believe in, and I think the findings of our staff would support that also. So, as a person who implements these programs for our district, it's very exciting to have that buy-in from our entire district and, that financial and philosophical support of our team. So, do you have any questions today? But if not, otherwise, I just want to thank you for that recognition and in honor of our school district and our staff. And, our goal is to improve student achievement, and we believe this program, our career development model, does that. So, thank you.
We appreciate you being here, and for all of you, I know you are doing some really good work in Beech Grove, and we appreciate it. Liz, you're coming